Hello everyone, it's ZLR, and today I'm going to be going over the week 11 games for my little recap. But pretty happy as a certain team had to lose this week, and oh man, it gave me joy, a lot of it. And you guys will find that one out pretty soon anyway. But anyway, let's just get right into this. The first game we had was the Thursday night game with the Washington Commanders going up against the Eagles, and the Eagles winning that one 26-18. But it was a pretty good game. I feel like the Commanders actually kind of held their own against the Eagles. I know it was a 8 point difference, but I mean, it was still a pretty good game. But anyway, we had Jaden Daniels complete 22 passes out of 32 attempts for 191 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. Then we had Brian Robinson with 16 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown. Jaden Daniels had 7 carries for 18 yards. Austin Eckler had 2 carries for 7 yards. And Jeremy McNichols had 3 carries for 5 yards. Then we had quite the amount of receivers. So I'm just gonna try to go over them real quick. Austin Eckler, 8 receptions, 89 yards. Zach Ertz, 6 receptions, 47 yards and a touchdown. We had John Bates with 2 receptions for 17 yards. Scary Terry with 1 reception for 10 yards, as well as Omalad Zacchaeus. Literally was just saying his name, and then all of a sudden he had to be in the first game. Brian Robinson had 1 reception for 9 yards. We had Noah Brown and Dimey Brown with 1 reception for 4 yards. And Jeremy McNichols had 1 reception for 1 yard. For the Eagles side of things, we had Jalen Hurts complete 18 passes out of 28 attempts and for 221 yards. Pretty decent game there. Saquon Barkley still looking scary. 26 carries, 146 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Kenneth Gainwell had four four carries for 43 yards. Then we had Jalen Hurts with 10 carries, 39 yards, and a touchdown. We had A.J. Brown with 5 receptions for 65 yards. Dallas Goedert with 5 receptions, 61 yards. Saquon Barkley with 2 receptions for 52 yards. We had Devonta Smith with 4 receptions for 29 yards. Jahan Dotson with 1 reception for 6 yards. And Kenneth Gainwell with 1 reception for 6 yards. Then we had the Raiders and the Dolphins, with the Dolphins winning at 34-19. The Dolphins actually getting their wins back now since Tua's kind of came back, huh? Uh, we had Gardner Minshew with 30 completions, 43 attempts for 282 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a interception. We had Jacoby Myers with 1 carry for 20 yards. Alexander Madison with 5 carries for 19 yards. Zamir White with 5 carries for 9 yards. Gardner Minshew with 2 carries for 7 yards. Trey Tucker with 1 carry for 7 yards. Amir Abdullah with 1 carry for 1 yard. And Brock Bowers with 1 carry but -3 yards. But he did show out Mr. Brock Bowers and got 13 receptions, 126 yards, and a touchdown. Alexander Madison had 3 receptions for 50 yards. DJ Turner had 3 receptions for 29 yards. Jacoby Myers had 4 receptions for 28 yards. Trey Tucker had 3 receptions for 28 yards. Amir Abdullah had 3 receptions, 16 yards, and a touchdown. And Michael Mayer had 1 reception for 5 yards. I feel like I haven't heard that name in a while. Then we had Tua with 28 completions out of 36 attempts for 288 yards and 3 touchdowns. A pretty good game from him. Uh, Devon Achan with 17 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown. We had Malik Washington with 1 carry for 7 yards. We had Jalen Wright with 5 carries for 4 yards. And Raheem Mostert with 3 carries but got -2 yards. Good thing I didn't play him in fantasy this week. Jonnu Smith with 6 receptions, 101 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Tyreek Hill with 7 receptions, 61 yards, and a touchdown. Jalen Waddle with 2 receptions, 37 yards. Devon Achane with 4 receptions, 32 yards. Julian Hill with 2 receptions, 28 yards. Odell Beckham with 2 receptions for 13 yards. Malik Washington with 3 receptions, 11 yards. Uh, Durham Smith with 1 reception for 3 yards. And Jalen Wright with 1 reception for 2 yards. Then we had the Saints and the Browns, with the Saints winning it 35-14. And also, if you guys noticed, I pulled my string down a little bit. I noticed it on my camera, and it was kind of bothering me. Probably bothered a few other people, but I didn't know, and I just did it. But anyway, Jameis Winston, 30 completions out of 46 attempts, 395 yards, and a touchdown. We also had Dorian Thompson Robinson with 1 attempt. Nick Chubb had 11 carries, 50 yards. Jerome Ford had 5 carries for 10 yards. Jameis Winston had 1 carry for 8 yards. Pierre Strong Jr. had 2 carries for 5 yards. And Kadarius Toney had 1 carry but got -7 yards. I have not seen Kadarius Toney's name at all this season, I feel like. Jerry Jeudy had a day. 6 receptions, 142 yards, and a touchdown. David Njoku had 9 receptions, 81 yards. Elijah Moore had, holy shit, he had the 666. 6 receptions, 66 yards, and a touchdown. Cedric Tillman had 3 receptions for 47 yards. Jerome Ford had 4 receptions for 29 yards. Jordan Atkins had 1 reception for 19 yards. And Jamari Thrash had 1 reception for 11 yards. Do not think I heard that name yet, but also all the receivers had double-digit numbers at least, so pretty good game there, I guess. Then we had Derek Carr doing his thing there. 21 completions out of 27 attempts, 248 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We also had Taysom Hill with 1 completion out of 2 attempts for 18 yards and a interception. Taysom Hill, though, holy shit. 7 carries, 138 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara had 16 carries for 67 yards. Derek Carr had 1 carry for 8 yards. Jordan Mims had 2 carries for 3 yards. And Jake Haener, I still really, I don't think anyone's ever told me that I've said that wrong, but I don't know. But he had 2 carries for -2 yards. Then we had Marquez Valdes-Scantling with 2 receptions, 87 yards, and a touchdown. Taysom Hill with 8 receptions for 50 yards. Foster Moreau had 3 receptions for 50 yards. We had Javon Johnson with 3 receptions, 30 yards, and a touchdown. Alvin Kamara had 4 receptions for 22 yards. Kevin Austin had 1 reception for 18 yards. And Dante Pettis had 1 reception for 9 yards. Then we had a very close game with the Colts win at 28-27 against the Jets. And I mean, Anthony Richardson didn't look all that bad. I like Anthony Richardson. I hope I just really hope he has a good time because I mean, like, I know the last few weeks has not been really the best for him, but I just hope he does well. But anyway, speaking of him, he had 20 completions out of 30 attempts for 272 yards and a touchdown. We had Jonathan Taylor with 24 carries for 57 yards. Anthony Richardson had 10 carries, 32 yards, and two touchdowns. Adonai Mitchell had one carry for 2 yards. Then we had Josh Downs with 5 receptions, 84 yards, and a touchdown. Alec Pierce with 3 receptions for 74 yards. Michael Pittman Jr. with 5 receptions for 46 yards. Adonai Mitchell with 1 reception for 33 yards. Mo Alley Cox with 2 receptions for 17 yards. Andrew Ogletree with 1 reception for 8 yards. I feel like I said that wrong for some reason. Kalen Granson, 1 reception for 4 yards. Trace Sermon with 1 reception for 3 yards, as well as Jonathan Taylor. And for the Jets side of things, Aaron Rodgers also didn't look all that bad. He had 22 completions out of 29 attempts, 184 yards, and two touchdowns. We had Breece Hall with 16 carries, 78 yards, and a touchdown. Aaron Rodgers had one carry for 7 yards. Braylon Allen had 2 carries for 6 yards. And Tyler Conklin had a carry but didn't get anything out of it. Devontae Adams had 6 receptions for 72 yards. Breece Hall had 7 receptions, 43 yards, and a touchdown. Garrett Wilson had 4 receptions, 18 yards. Xavier Gipson had 1 reception for 17 yards. Kenny Yeboah, 1 reception, 11 yards, and a touchdown. All of the ones you could possibly have. Malachi Corley, 1 reception for 10 yards. I feel so bad for him still. Tyler Conklin, 1 reception for 7 yards. And Jeremy Ruckert with 1 reception for 6 yards. Then we had the Vikings versus the Titans, with the Vikings winning at 23-13. We had Sam Darnold with 20 completions out of 32 attempts, 246 yards, and two touchdowns. We had Aaron Jones with 15 carries for 39 yards. Cam Akers with 10 carries for 25 yards. And Sam Darnold with 8 carries for 18 yards and a touchdown. Justin Jefferson had 6 receptions, 81 yards. Jordan Addison had 3 receptions, 61 yards, and a touchdown. Josh Oliver had 3 receptions for 34 yards. Trent Sherfield Sr. had 1 reception for 16 yards. TJ Hawkinson had 2 receptions for 13 yards. Johnny Munt had 1 reception for 13 yards, as well as Brandon Powell. Cam Akers had 2 receptions for 11 yards and a touchdown. And Aaron Jones had 1 reception for 4 yards. For the Titans, Will Levis had 17 completions out of 31 attempts, 295 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. Will Levis also had 7 carries for 18 yards. Tony Pollard had 9 carries for 15 yards. And Tajay Spears had 3 carries but got nothing out of it. That run defense, pretty crazy for the friggin' Vikings there. Nick Westbrook, 2 receptions for 117 yards and a touchdown. That's just crazy. Calvin Ridley had 4 receptions, 58 yards. Tyler Boyd had 2 receptions for 34 yards. We had Bryce Oliver with 1 reception for 33 yards. Chig Okonkwo with 2 receptions for, what was it, 9 yards? No, 19 yards. I had the 9 correct, but I needed the 1 added on to it. Tony Pollard 2 receptions, 14 yards. Tajay Spears with 2 receptions, 8 yards. Josh Weil and Nick Van Nett had 1 reception for 6 yards. And then we had the Green Bay Packers still owning the Bears 20-19. And yeah, Bears, that missed field goal, well, actually more like a blocked field goal. Not great. Not great at all. But anyway, we had Jordan Love, 13 completions out of 17 attempts, 261 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. Josh Jacobs had 18 carries, 76 yards, and a touchdown. Jordan Love had 4 carries for 18 yards and a touchdown. We had Emmanuel Wilson with 2 carries for 17 yards, and Jaden Reed with 1 carry for -5 yards. Christian Watson had 4 receptions for 150 yards. Josh Jacobs had 4 receptions for 58 yards. Jaden Reed had 2 receptions, 23 yards, and a touchdown. Romeo Doubs had 1 reception for 17 yards. And Chris Brooks had 2 receptions for 13 yards. Pissed off that they didn't give Tucker Kraft the ball at all because I had him starting on my fantasy league. That gave me pain because I had no other friggin' tight ends because I had, was it Trey McBride on friggin' bye, and another one I had is on IR or whatever it is. No, not IR. He was out for that game, but I think he's coming back this week. I hope. But anyway, we have Caleb Williams, 23 completions out of 31 attempts, 231 yards. DeAndre Swift had 14 carries, 71 yards, and a touchdown. Caleb Williams had 9 carries for 70 yards. Roschon Johnson had 10 carries, 33 yards, and a touchdown. And DJ Moore had 1 carry for 5 yards. Rome Odunze had 6 receptions, 65 yards. DJ Moore had 7 receptions for 62 yards. Cole Kmet had 3 receptions for 42 yards. Keenan Allen had 4 receptions for 41 yards. DeAndre Swift had 2 receptions for 13 yards. And Roschon Johnson had 1 reception for 8 yards. Then we had a absolute slaughter as the Lions just completely mauled the Jaguars, 52-6. That is the second time the Lions have scored 50 plus points this season. I hope they go to this fucking Super Bowl. Mac Jones, 17 completions out of 29 attempts, 138 yards, and a interception. Oh, Mac. I'm sorry. Travis Etienne Jr., 12 carries, 27 yards. Mac Jones, 2 carries, 7 yards. Brian Thomas Jr., 1 carry, 4 yards. And D'Ernest Johnson, 2 carries for 3 yards. Brian Thomas Jr. had 5 receptions, 82 yards. Evan Ingram had 5 receptions, 28 yards. We had Parker Washington with 1 reception for 10 yards. Travis Etienne Jr. with 3 receptions for 6 yards. Brenton Strange with 1 reception for 6 yards. Both Luke Farrell and Gabe Davis had 1 reception for 3 yards. I hope Gabe Davis gets better as soon as possible. I know about his injury. Hey. Also, that that uniform combo that the Jaguars used, it was weird. It was weird. Very weird. But anyway, we had Jared Goff, 24 completions out of 29 attempts, 412 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And we also had Hendon Hooker complete 3 passes out of 4 attempts for 37 yards. David Montgomery had 15 carries, 75 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs had 11 carries, 69 yards, nice, and a touchdown. I can see why they're called Knuckles and Sonic now. God damn. Jared Goff had 4 carries for 21 yards. We had Craig Reynolds with 2 carries for 21 yards. Sion Vaki with 5 carries for 9 yards. Hendon Hooker with 4 carries for 3 yards. Jameson Williams with 1 carry for 2 yards. And Amon-Ra St. Brown with 1 carry but got -4 yards because of it. Ooh, 2 100 plus yard receivers here. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 11 receptions, 161 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Jameson Williams, 4 receptions, 124 yards, and a touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs had 1 reception for 54 yards. Khalif Raymond had 2 receptions for 30 yards. Tim Patrick had 3 receptions for 26 yards. Shane Zalistra? What the fuck, name? I do not know. That's the first time I ever seen that name even come up. But he had 1 reception for 22 yards. David Montgomery had 3 receptions for 20 yards. Allen Robinson had 1 reception for 7 yards. And Brock Wright had 1 reception, 5 yards, and a touchdown. Then we had the Rams and my Patriots. 28-22, the Rams won. I mean, it was a good game nonetheless. I can't really be mad at it. But anyway, we had Matthew Stafford, 18 completions, 27 attempts, 295 yards, and 4 touchdowns. We had Kyren Williams with 15 carries, 86 yards. Blake Corum with 5 carries, 21 yards. And Matthew Stafford had 4 carries but didn't get anything out of it. Puka Nacua had 7 receptions, 123 yards, and a touchdown. Cooper Kupp had 6 receptions, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Tutu Atwell had 1 reception for 21 yards. Demarcus Robinson had 2 receptions for 19 yards. Colby Parkinson had 1 reception, 19 yards, and a touchdown. And Blake Corum had 1 reception for 7 yards. For the Patriots side of things, Drake May, 30 completions out of 40 attempts, 282 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a interception. It does seem like he's getting better every week, it feels like. Ramondre Stevenson, 20 carries for 73 yards. Drake May, 3 carries for 27 yards. Antonio Gibson, 4 carries, 18 yards. Marcus Jones, 1 carry for 5 yards. Wait a second. Huh? Marcus Jones, our cornerback, got a carry for 5 yards. That's actually kind of sick. JaMycal Hasty, 2 carries for 2 yards. Kendrick Bourne, 5 receptions, 70 yards, and a touchdown. Hunter Henry, 6 receptions for 63 yards. Demario Douglas, 5 receptions for 59 yards. Austin Hooper with 4 receptions for 35 yards. Kayshon Boutte with 4 receptions, 33 yards. Ramondre Stevenson had 4 receptions for 16 yards. Veteran Low. There's names on our team that I still really can't pronounce all too well. Our offensive tackle had 1 reception for 4 yards and a touchdown. Antonio Gibson had 1 reception for 2 yards. Then we had the Ravens and the Steelers, with the Steelers win at 18-16. Lamar Jackson had 16 completions out of 33 attempts, 207 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. We had Derrick Henry with 13 carries, 65 yards, and a touchdown. Lamar Jackson had 4 carries, 46 yards. And Justice Hill had 2 carries for 13 yards. Isaiah Likely had 4 receptions, 75 yards. Zay Flowers had 2 receptions for 39 yards and a touchdown. Rashad Bateman had 2 receptions, 30 yards. Justice Hill had 4 receptions for 28 yards. Mark Andrews had 2 receptions for 22 yards. Tylan Wallace had 1 reception for 8 yards. And Patrick Richard had 1 reception for 5 yards. For the Steelers, we had Russell Wilson with 23 completions out of 36 attempts, 205 yards, and a interception. Najee Harris had 18 carries for 63 yards. We had Jaylen Warren with 9 carries, 41 yards. Justin Fields had 2 carries for 17 yards. Russell Wilson had 4 carries for 1 yard. And Cordero Patterson had 1 carry but didn't get anything out of it. Then we had George Pickens, 8 receptions, 89 yards. I almost said 39 yards for some reason. Darnell Washington, 2 receptions for 42 yards. Najee Harris had 4 receptions for 30 yards. We had Jaylen Warren with 4 receptions, 27 yards. Pat Freiermuth with two receptions for 14 yards. Ben Skowronek with 1 reception for 4 yards. And Cordell Patterson with 1 reception but didn't get anything out of it. Calvin Austin had 1 reception but got -1 yard from that as well. Then we had the Seahawks and the 49ers, with the Seahawks win at 20-17. Geno Smith with 25 completions out of 32 attempts, 221 yards, and a interception. We had Kenneth Walker with 14 carries, 54 yards, and a touchdown. Geno Smith had 4 carries, 29 yards, and a touchdown. Jackson Smith had 1 carry for 8 yards. And Zach Charbonnet had, I don't know why I just said it like that, 4 carries for 3 yards. Jackson Smith had 10 receptions, 110 yards. DK Metcalf had 7 receptions for 70 yards. Tyler Lockett had 2 receptions for 19 yards. AJ Barner had 2 receptions for 15 yards. Kenneth Walker had 2 receptions for 5 yards, and Zach Charbonnet had 2 receptions for 2 yards. If I said 15 yards for Tyler Lockett, I believe, I meant to say 19, but I mean, I'll check it back anyway. Brock Purdy, 21 completions out of 28 attempts, 159 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. Christian McCaffrey had 19 carries for 79 yards. Brock Purdy had 5 carries, 40 yards, and a touchdown. Jordan Mason had 2 carries for 13 yards, and Deebo Samuel had 1 carry but got -1 yard from that. Jawan Jennings had 10 receptions, 91 yards, and a touchdown. Christian McCaffrey had 4 receptions for 27 yards. Deebo Samuel had 4 receptions for 22 yards. Kyle Juszczyk had 2 receptions for 12 yards. And Eric Saubert had 1 reception for 7 yards. Then we had the Broncos and the Falcons, with the Broncos win 38-6. This was a very good Broncos game. Kirk Cousins had 18 completions out of 27 attempts, 173 yards, and a interception. Michael Penix had 2 completions out of 4 attempts for 24 yards. Whoa. Excuse me. Then we had Bijan Robinson with 12 carries, 35 yards. Jace McClellan. Jesus. 8 carries, 15 yards, and Kirk Cousins, 1 carry, but didn't get anything out of it. If I did say that name wrong, just let me know. Drake London had 3 receptions for 61 yards. Ray McLeod had 6 receptions for 46 yards. Bijan Robinson had 4 receptions for 28 yards. Darnell Mooney had 2 receptions for 27 yards. We had Kaderil Hodge with 2 receptions for 22 yards. Kyle Pitts had 1 reception for 9 yards. Ross Dwelley had 1 reception for 5 yards. And Tyler Algier had one reception but got negative 1 yard from it. Then we had Bo Nix with 28 completions out of 33 attempts, 307 yards, and 4 touchdowns. We had Javonte Williams with 9 carries, 59 yards, and a touchdown. We had Jaleel McLaughlin with 4 carries, 19 yards. Audric Estime with 6 carries for 16 yards. Bo Nix with 2 carries for 5 yards. Marvin Mims with 3 carries for 4 yards. And Michael Burton with 2 carries for 2 yards. Cortland Sutton with 7 receptions, 78 yards. Devon Vele with 4 receptions, 66 yards. Lil Jordan Humphrey with 4 receptions, 52 yards, and a touchdown. Marvin Mims with 2 receptions, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Jameson Javonte Williams with 4 receptions, 28 yards. Troy Franklin with 2 receptions, 15 yards, and a touchdown. Nate Adkins with 1 reception, 12 yards, and a touchdown. Audric Estime with 3 receptions, 9 yards. And Michael Burton with 1 reception, but negative 2 yards. By the way, if you heard that beeping in the background, there's a trash truck outside. And then we get to the game that I was talking about way earlier into the video. The Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills, with the Chiefs losing 30-21. And all NFL fans, except for the Chiefs fans, are very much happy about it. And the 72 Dolphins can pop their champagne, like what I said in my little recap video for that. And also Tom Grossi did say it too in his NFL fans react to the Chiefs losing, I believe. But anyway, we had old Patrick Mahomes, aka Kermit Mahomes, with 23 completions out of 33 attempts, 196 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Kareem Hunt with 14 carries for 60 yards. Mecole Hardman with 1 carry for 9 yards. Xavier Worthy with 1 carry for 7 yards. And Carson Steele with 1 carry for 2 yards. Xavier Worthy had 4 receptions, 61 yards, and a touchdown. DeAndre Hopkins with 3 receptions for 29 yards. We had Justin Watson with 2 receptions, 26 yards. Noah Gray with 4 receptions, 23 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Mecole Hardman with 2 receptions, 12 yards. Peyton Hendershot with 1 reception for 11 yards. Sam J. Perine with 2 receptions for 8 yards, as well as Travis Kelce. Juju Smith had 1 reception for 8 yards. Mike Caliendo. I don't even know how to say that. And Carson Steele both had 1 reception for 5 yards. And for the Bills side of things, we had Josh Allen with 27 completions out of 40 attempts, 262 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. Josh Allen also had 12 carries, 55 yards, and a touchdown. We had James Cook with 9 carries, 20 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Talking too fast here. I might have even said 12 receptions for Josh Allen, but probably didn't. Uh, then we had Ty Johnson with 5 carries for 18 yards, and Ray Davis with 5 carries for 11 yards. Khalil Shakir had 8 receptions, 70 yards. Curtis Samuel had 5 receptions, 58 yards, and a touchdown. Uh, Amari Cooper had 2 receptions for 55 yards. Dawson Knox had 4 receptions for 40 yards. Mac Hollins had 2 receptions for 27 yards. James Cook had 5 receptions for 7 yards. Zach Davidson had 1 reception for 5 yards. Then we had the Sunday night football matchup between the Chargers and the Bengals, with the Chargers win at 34-27. The Bengals actually pulling the Chargers, I believe, in this game. Uh Joe Burrow completed 28 passes out of 50 attempts, 356 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Chase Brown had 22 carries for 86 yards. Joe Burrow had 2 carries for 28 yards. And Drew Sample had 1 carry, -4 yards. T. Higgins had 9 receptions, 148 yards, and a touchdown. Jamar Chase had 7 receptions, 75 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Chase Brown had 5 receptions, 57 yards. Andre Losavis with 3 receptions, 46 yards. We had Tanner Hudson with 2 receptions for 13 yards. Drew Sample with 1 reception for 9 yards. And Jermaine Burton with 1 reception for 8 yards. And for the Chargers side of things, we had Justin Herbert completing 17 passes out of 36 attempts, 297 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He also had 5 carries for 65 yards. J.K. Dobbins had 11 carries, 56 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Gus Edwards had 6 carries for 27 yards. Uh, Darius Davis had 1 carry for 6 yards, and Hassan Haskins had 2 carries for 1 yard. Ladd McConkey had 6 receptions, 123 yards. Will Dissly had 4 receptions, 80 yards, and a touchdown. Quentin Johnston had 2 receptions, 48 yards, and a touchdown. We had Joshua Palmer with 2 receptions, 23 yards. We had Darius Davis with 1 reception for 14 yards. We had Tucker Fisk with 1 reception for 6 yards. And J.K. Dobbins with 1 reception for 3 yards. Then to conclude week 11, we had the two Texas teams go up against each other, with the Texans winning it 34-10 against the Cowboys. We had CJ Stroud leading it with 23 completions out of 34 attempts, 257 yards, and a interception. Joe Mixon had 20 carries, 109 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He was definitely balling. CJ Stroud had 3 carries for 26 yards. Tank Dell had 1 carry for 4 yards. And Dameon Pierce had 1 carry for 2 yards. Nico Collins and Tank Dell both had 4 receptions for 54 yards. Joe Mixon had 2 receptions for 44 yards. Dalton Schultz had 5 receptions for 33 yards. John Mechie had 3 receptions for 33 yards. We had Cade Stover with 2 receptions for 15 yards. Robert Woods with 2 receptions for 13 yards. And Dare Ungambale with 1 reception for 11 yards. And for the Cowboys side of things, we had Cooper Rush, 32 completions out of 55 attempts, 354 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. And we also had Brian Anger with 1 completion out of 1 attempt for 4 yards. We had Rico Dowdle with 10 carries, 28 yards. Deuce Vaughn with 4 carries, 13 yards. CeeDee Lamb with 1 carry for 13 yards, Ezekiel Elliott with 1 carry for 8 yards, and Cooper Rush with 2 carries for 2 yards. A lot of wide receivers. Holy poop. CeeDee Lamb with 8 receptions, 93 yards. Cavante Turpin with 3 receptions, 86 yards, and a touchdown. We had Luke Schoonmaker with 6 receptions, 56 yards. Brevin Spam-Ford with 4 receptions, 42 yards. We had Jalen Tolbert with 2 receptions, 21 yards. We had Ryan Flournoy. I think that name is, with 2 receptions, 19 yards. Ezekiel Elliott with 3 receptions for 16 yards. Jake Ferguson with 1 reception for 11 yards. Rico Dowdle with 2 receptions for 6 yards. Wanya Thomas, I believe his name is, and Deuce Vaughn had 1 reception for 4 yards. And that will be it for the Week 11 recap. And tomorrow will be the Week 12 predictions for the NFL for me. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Honestly, I actually enjoyed making this one. And as always, hope you guys like, subscribe, comment, do really whatever you want to do. And I'll see you all in the next episode of whatever I do. And I'll see you around.